back to Doris and Daddy Off-Road.
Woo! Here's a walk around of our Jeep.
Here's a walk around of our Jeep.
Here's a walk around of our Jeep. So we thought that it's about time that we showed you what the whole Jeep looks like. I'm sorry this video is a bit of a mishmash.
We've had a difficult time getting our schedules together for the last few months, so we've started and we've filmed little bits and pieces here and there, but never actually finished a video all at once. But we hope you enjoy it. So let's start with the basics, and then we'll talk in a little more detail about the suspension and one of our favorite add-ons near the end. Our Jeep is a 1998 Cherokee Sport with a AW4 automatic transmission. It has about 5.5 inches of lift and sits on 32-inch tires. We're thinking about putting 35s on in the future.
Help.
35s!
Help me. I can't get into the Jeep now. How am I going to get into the Jeep then?
The motor is a basically stock 4-liter straight 6 that has somewhere around 215,000 miles on it. We have the original stock axles, which in our case consist of a Chrysler 8¼ in the rear and a Dana 30 in the front. The transfer case is a NP231 with a Advance Adapters slip yoke eliminator kit. We run CavFab Alpha 3-link long arms with Rubicon Express springs and Bilstein shocks. We will talk a little more about the lift and why it is as needlessly high as it is in a minute. When we bought the Jeep about 6 years ago, it already had the snorkel, the hood vents, and cut fenders. We added the Bushwhacker fender flares pretty quickly to try to keep rocks from flying everywhere.
Grandpa did most of that work.
The front bumper is just a stock bumper that has been cut and had the receiver hitch and a few other tabs welded on. The rear bumper is from Smittybilt. The front and mid sections of the Jeep have stiffeners welded to the unibody. As Doris is fond of reminding people, I'm not much of a welder, and the stiffeners are definitely proof of that. We have a Durango steering box that is held in place by a eBay steering box spacer and has been reinforced with a BoostWorks engineering brace. We still use the factory drag link, but the tie rod is from a V8 Grand Cherokee. Since the Jeep has become our go-to vehicle for hunting trips throughout Nevada, we added a cheap roof rack to increase the carrying capacity of the compact XJ. Building something more custom and better looking is on our short list of projects. The Rigid Industry spotlights on the front bumper were added after an early trip into the Mojave Preserve demonstrated that the factory headlights were not enough to find our way in the darkness. We later added the cheap floodlights for some extra light off to the sides, and the rigid Hyperspot to add a little distance beyond the spots. The switches for the lights are on a custom panel that replaces the ashtray in the center console. We also added a CB radio so that somebody can talk to her friends while we're out on the trail.
I'd like to order 1 milkshake, please.
I think that covers the basic configuration of our XJ, so now we will add some details about the suspension. Let's think of this as a cautionary tale, or maybe a we learned the hard way story. Shortly after we bought the Jeep, we installed a Rough Country 3.5-inch full leaf pack lift. The rear spring started to sag pretty quickly, which was only made worse by adding the Smittybilt bumper. The first real issue that we had was that the shackles would hit the sheet metal behind the factory mounts when going over relatively small bumps. To address this problem, we added a Rough Country shackle relocation bracket and longer shackles. This cured the bottoming out issue and improved the overall ride because it put the shackles at a better angle. Sadly, it created another issue by rotating the rear differential enough that the passenger side shock had about 2 inches less travel than the one on the driver's side. In retrospect,
We just ignored the real problem, which was the weak leaf springs. A trend that continued for several years.
Fixated on the passenger shock, and needing to pull a fairly large trailer, we replaced the rough country shocks with a pair of Monroe load-helping shocks. The combination of all these parts put the XJ's lift at roughly 4.5 inches. So to balance things out, we added a set of spring spacers to the front. This setup worked pretty well for several years, until one of the Monroe shocks went bad. At this point, we thought that it would be worth finally addressing those saggy leaf springs so that we could put an appropriate pair of shocks on the Jeep. Realizing that the shackles and relocation brackets were adding some lift, but not really understanding how much that was actually true, we went with 3.5-inch leaf springs from Rubicon Express. The whole setup seems to have settled at a little over 5.5 inches. With that number determined, we picked up a set of 5.5-inch Rubicon Express coil springs for the front. Honestly, this is more lift than we need, or really want, but it works, and it's what we have. At the time that this video is being made, our suspension upgrade isn't finished. We are making a set of shock brackets so that we can remove the old ones and weld new ones on in a position that works better for our pinion angle. And, as part of that project, we will also be adding some custom bits to the axle to give the bump stops something better to hit. One of the more useful additions to our XJ is the tow bar. We added this after losing an alternator on a trip into the wilderness. On that trip, we were able to get back to a local town before the Jeep was inoperable, but it put the idea of an easy tow setup into our heads. Since then, we have used it a few times to drag our Jeep back and forth from camping and hunting trips. It's a nice way to have a second vehicle in the area in case the XJ takes too much abuse. We know that our Jeep isn't terribly unique or amazing, but it fits our needs, and even with a few mistakes, we are proud to have done nearly all of the work ourselves. We really like seeing what other people have done in their builds, and hope that seeing the good and bad of ours might help inspire someone else. Hey, Dor.
Hello, what you doing?
I was finishing up the XJ walk-around video.
Oh, cool. You need anything?
I just need an outro.
Well, that's easy.